time. Started about 2 years ago, and so we decided to put in a proposal for PW in fall 2015. And we saw that there was an opportunity to do a webinar this spring. We put in a proposal, and our proposal was selected. And it's an idea about how you can have informal faculty meetings, meetings that can happen in the hallway, at a conference, in pods, in one of the on campuses, the faculty pods for adjuncts, and how they really can take these informal, 2 or 3 minute conversations and actually become very collaborative. A quick synopsis of our department, because we weren't sure if this was common in other departments or not. In our department, all adjuncts and full-time faculty teach as generalists. This means that even though Cindy's specialty is in colonial U.S., Sarah's specialty is going to be in more modern U.S. and Latin America, and my specialty is actually in ancient medieval. We actually teach classes that can span all parts of the globe in all regions. So we hire to teach as generalists, and we really are slotted into classes based on our availability, not necessarily our knowledge. And of course, we cover all of the GT pathway courses, as well as a select number of more specialized classes. And so at the beginning of each semester, the department puts on a symposium that looks at new college policies that we need to be aware of, new practices, not just at the college, but in our discipline, as well as techniques. And how this started for us is we began meeting outside of work. We actually, the three of us, met actually at a conference and a symposium, and one of our colleagues actually suggested, because we teach this broad array of classes, maybe it would be a good idea to get together maybe after work. And so we started doing this, and we were talking about our academic interests as well as socializing. And the meeting was open to everyone. They were scheduled through things like Facebook, our Outlook calendars at the college, at text, via text, and we meet at coffee shops. And initially it was just a way to relax, enjoy each other's company, and maybe get some of that intellectual conversation that maybe we weren't getting in other areas of our lives. And every semester, we would try to fit these around our schedules. It started about 2 years ago. And over the course of the last 2 years, we've had people come in sporadically, come in when they can. But it turns out that, although we've got, I think most of the adjuncts in our faculty in our department have here at one of our weeks, that for the most part, Cindy, Sarah, and I started meeting almost every week. And so we don't have to. It just so happens that we tend to meet every week. The time we meet is really up to the individuals who are interested and involved. And as scholars, we're all very, very different. We have very different teaching philosophies. We have different ideas about what goes on in the classroom. We have different ideas about our roles, about assignments. And so the idea was, if you bring all of these very different kinds of experiences together, that you would actually have a better meeting, that we have a more engaging conversation. And so we start adapting to suit the needs of the individuals. And it turns out that while started kind of in this very informal talking about our interests, what started to happen was we'd realize, grading, as I'm sure is the case for everyone, can be very time-consuming. And so we were all grading um, in isolation. And so the idea is, well, we're meeting anyway, so maybe we'll bring our grading, and so there would be some accountability. And it turns out that once we started bringing in our academic work, that we started getting just a barrage of new ideas. And so we were talking, and I'd say, I have this assignment that last semester didn't quite work very well, and I could, bring out to other members of my department, and we could pick it apart. We could have thought about this. Have you thought about that? And at the end, I would have a better assignment. And so then maybe Sarah would say, you know what, this is a really good idea. I hadn't thought about putting this into my class. I'm going to adapt that. And all of a sudden, all of us were sharing ideas and sharing assignments and sharing ideas about how academia would work. And it worked really, really well. All of a sudden, rather than being isolated, which I think so often we do, we felt like we were part of a community of learners. We started sharing practices, started sharing assessments. So some of us were actually using the same assignment. We could actually assess on a much broader scale than just, did this work in my class? I can now look at multiple sections of that class under different faculty and say, does this assignment work? Yes or no? It showed us that change is always needed. Sydney and I have all been teaching for a long time, and it showed us that education should be fluid, and that the more examples that we had, the more voices we heard, the better our assessments, the assignments, that our classroom experiences with our students became. That's kind of how it happened. This is not the way it has to happen for everyone, but this is kind of how, over the last 2 years, we came from these very informal meetings during coffee breaks at PDW Week. We were PDW, we were attending different workshops a few years ago, and during coffee breaks, we'd see a friendly face, and we would talk about what we were learning. We were engaging outside relations. For example, some of us had been friends in graduate school, or our graduate school had overlapped. For example, Cindy graduated the semester I started graduate school. I graduated the semester Sarah started graduate school. We realized that we lived in the neighborhoods. And then a college started Scholar Nights. This was about a semester into this. And just said, let's have coffee and let's just chat. And great. And that semester, we realized that finally was coming. We had a lot of grading. And so the idea was, why don't we grade together? As finals week that semester, we all went actually to Montague's, and we sat there for 2 days and did all of our grading together. So even though we weren't collaborating at this point, right, we were still grading in isolation, but we were grading in isolation together. During breaks, right, someone would glance up, and in these grading meetings, it would talk about, well, this is, kind of how I approach something, or this, this was an article I just read, history. And so we would have these snippets of conversation while we're taking breaks from our grading that lasted about a semester. So the next semester, we're like, grading was so much fun. Why don't we do this once a month? And then every 2 weeks, and then every week. And so found ourselves, because we were meeting pretty often, that we started brainstorming ideas on assignments. I would go out to Sydney and say, I'm teaching colonial America today, this semester, and I'm really unsure about an approach. And she would say, what, I've got some resources, I've got some articles that come out about this event. Why don't I shoot them to you? And I'd be like, that's fantastic. And so we started sharing these kinds of resources. Then we started sharing assignments. Then we started sharing ideas about how we lecture. And so all of a sudden we were having these amazing conversations about teaching and our role in teaching. And I look forward to them. And we would meet more often. This is why we went from once a month to twice a month to every week, because we found the conversations so valuable. And all of a sudden we found ourselves collaborating on grants, collaborating on conferences, collaborating on it. And today we collaborate on pretty much everything. It's gotten to the point where I can, for one of my colleagues, and know what their approach to teaching is, know how they would approach a particular assignment, how their thought process when they're talking about a particular subject, and feel really comfortable about going into their class and feeling really comfortable about them coming to my class. It's not that idea that, oh, I'm sick, I need a sub, I don't know what I'm going to get. Now I know the quality of instruction I'm going to get from my colleagues because I know them, because I know their very deeply held ideas about what teaching means to them, which I think is fantastic. And so about a year of this, I would never go back. And that when I'm sitting next to someone at PDW Week, I'm excited to learn about their approach to teaching. And I've actually been able to go outside of my department and do some really interesting collaborations just because I've been able now to turn that coffee break or the small group task that we have in a PDW session and really go beyond the task and really build those connections across campus. I think you are up.
I'm Cindy Kretzinger. Last year, after we'd been doing some of these collaborative sessions, grading sessions, and kind of brainstorming, we were at PDW Week, and we've been talking about integrating elements of the syllabus to make it more accessible for students, to make it less like legalese and less like something that they would dread and more something that they would understand and embrace and genuinely use as a resource. I'm sure that's not department specific. That is something that I've heard discussed across the college. And so we were actually sitting there and thought, what about a newsletter? What something that doesn't just incorporate pictures, but is something that is actually very attractive looking and something that students might use a resource, might grab their interest. And so it's something that Nina, Sarah, and I actually did all together. These are just some examples. The one on the left of this page is one of my examples, actually. And this is just one page of my syllabus from my Latin American history class, I believe, that explains kind of the guidelines for class and a little bit of the pedagogy, which we'll touch on, that we've started exploring, and that's gamification. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later. The image on the right is Sarah's or Nina's, I'm sorry. That's Nina's from a colonial American history class, actually, from U.S. History 1. And you can see that while we all incorporate the same kind of idea, they look a little bit different, and they embrace different elements of our own personalities and our own teaching styles. And forward, I believe we have one more. And so this is, for example, this is from Sarah's, which I love. She makes it look even more professional than anything I've done. And it's very much tailored to the class. And this, I believe, was her African American history class. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yeah.
it is our own personalities, our teaching styles, but it also pulls in the student into kind of very much this exchange of and collaboration within the classroom. Next section, we talk about how the collaboration can be a little bit of anything. And this next couple of slides, pardon me for all the text, we just wanted to make sure you got all the background. This is a different kind of collaboration. In April of 2013, Justin Burnett, one of our other adjuncts, also a member of CEDL, and I attended the Reacting to the Past regional conference that was held at our Rampart Range campus. This is actually where I met Nina for the first time. Even cross paths where I graduated the semester she started in graduate school, I'd seen her across the room and such. We'd never actually met and talked one-on-one until this conference. But at this conference, we played a game called Kentucky 1861 that discusses the issue of secession and slavery in 1861 in Kentucky. Kentucky, of course, being a border state, but a slave state, this issue was quite front and center. Part of this conference was for anyone who wanted to explore games. Games can be used, they're not just historical games, although of course that's my focus, but they take any kind of element and be used for all different types of classes, and so they're really cross-disciplinary. The design session on Sunday at this conference, I brainstormed regarding charges of impeachment in the House Judiciary Committee against Richard Nixon in 1974. And during a break, Justin and I had a conversation because he was really exploring this idea about having to do with Native Americans in the early 19th century, following the Trail of Tears, but before war. And he asked me if I wanted to collaborate on that. And absolutely, I'd love to. But the grant that they were focusing on as part of the Rocky Mountain collaboration grant, as part of the community college system emphasis there, was looking for a shorter game, a chapter game. And we decided that the Native American game that he was proposing would probably need to be a much longer game, which doesn't necessarily suit community colleges. So we made the decision, we were quite comfortable together, to collaborate on creating a game revolving around Watergate. Discuss representatives over whether or not to issue charges of impeachment against Richard Nixon. In 2013, we issued a grant proposal after meeting twice in workshops to work out the details in a plan. And we were very honored to be one of the recipients, one of 5 recipients of the grant in June of that year. We met again at a shop, once again, very informal, to work out deadlines. I was scheduled to attend the National Conference for Reacting to the Past in New York City in early June. Nina also attended. And in July, we'd returned from the conference. Justin and I had to work on this via email, very informal emails, texts, because I was actually on vacation for over a month, driving down the East Coast with my recently graduated daughter, recently graduated from high school. Interestingly enough, I actually had broken my ankle early in the semester, so she ended up being the one driving. In early August, we had to have a final draft ready because we wanted to test it in our classes that fall. He had a history 1-2 class, which is U.S. History 2, and I had a Western Civilization 2 class. Watergate is discussed in both of those because it's something that impacts the Western world, not just the United States. And so we conducted both an alpha and beta test in our 2 classes. First, because of what fell in the semester, and so we were able to make adjustments to the game based on the results of his class and them in my class with those adjustments in place. We were able to attend each other's classes and work together on this. Then we finalized the instructor-student manual and so that in May of 2014, at the Rocky Mountain Collaboration Conference, the final game was tested, and we were fortunate enough, Sarah actually played a game during that testing conference. So it worked out really well, and we got a lot of really good feedback on it, to the point where it's been published and we've been able to work from here. And we did this all from informal collaboration. This started with just an idea in the hallway, and it went from there. Okay, I think this is this, Sarah.
Nope, this is your position paper.
Okay, okay, that's right. I'm sorry. So as part of our game, as a chapter game, you don't want really long assignments associated with it. And pretty traditional that with games you're going to have a speaking assignment. So one of their assignments is usually a speech. As we began, we realized that this is something that students may or may not be familiar with, not just Watergate, but how our Congress works. So we made the decision to have our first assignment of the game be something we call a position paper. They had to submit a 2 to 3 page typed double summary historical context that we give them of the game in their own words, as well as their understanding of the role they've been assigned within the game. And the idea is that they're going to submit this before game begins so that if there's any issues, we can catch them right away. And this very quickly moved into other events that Selena and I and several others have adopted whenever we do one of these games.
That's right, Cindy. As Cindy mentioned, as she mentioned, many of us are using games or a concept called gamification in a class where we usually have our students take on the persona, the role of a historical person in a game where they're not just debating or reenacting a debate. They actually they have a set of goals. They have a set of ambitions. They have some primary and secondary sources, and they have to really talk about a big issue. So in Justin's game, right, the central debate, of course, was should Nixon be impeached? Well, I play a series of these games, both that I've written. I do play the Watergate game that Cindy wrote, as well as the other 4 games that were published by the Rocky Mountain Collaborative. There are also published games through the Reacting to the Past Consortium. This is one that I've used for several years in my Western Civilization class. What I had noticed was the first day of debate would come, students were very confused. They didn't really know the sources. They didn't really know their role well. And so while I was sitting there with Cindy and Sarah, I said, I'm having this issue where my students are not prepared on the first day. And I was considering shortening it where we would have 1 to 2 days of debate rather than 3 or 4. And so this idea of having to have a day to really explore that I wanted them to know coming in was a problem of the model, so that coming in, they would know their character. And Cindy said, well, as part of the Watergate game, we need a position paper. And so I said, well, can I take a look at it? And so I've been able to take her idea, I've tweaked it a little bit to make it a little bit more, to suit a little bit better my teaching style. But again, coming from this very, collaboration, this informal collaboration, I do this, I play 5 of these one-day debate games, so 175-minute sessions. I've completely flipped the lesson to where they do all of the reading outside of class. They do all of the preparation outside of class. So when they come to class, we just do the debate. But before they come in, they have to have their position paper finished. And in this particular one, it Athens surrendered to Sparta during the Peloponnesian War, and I tell them exactly what they need to read to prepare. And in character, they have to answer this question. And I do that for the only things that I have to change in this is what the central debate of a particular game is, and again, what the readings are.
I can interrupt. We have a question. Are there any games in the science field, like biology?
Right now, I'm playing a game. It's the cholera outbreak in London, 1854, and the question is, the outbreak caused because of miasma, which had been the traditional understanding, or is it caused by this new idea of germ theory? So that's one that's very interesting. There's a second one about the food pyramid. When the food pyramid was going through adoption, so going from the pyramid to the plates, and trying to decide, is this going to reach enough people, particularly children and their families? Will the My Plate graphic be a better kind of memory device? But the basis of that is really looking at nutrition labels and calculating calories and how to depict this graphically. The games, like there's the Pluto debate. Should Pluto be reclassified as a planet, or should it be demoted to a planetary body? So that's a game now. And so there are 5 games that were funded specifically for the sciences. But those 2 are the only ones that I think would fit biology. The rest are really either computer science or physics.
Great, Nina.
You're welcome.
And is there a link for that? And a question, where do we find them? Is there a link for that?
Yes, it is. I can post it when Sarah starts. It is reacting.barnard.edu. I'll make sure to put that link. In fact, Sarah, could you put that link on the board?
Yeah.
Thank you. And it covers actually all of the games that are currently published, in development, but you can play things that are in development. Games that we've developed, like the I'm about to start is the Leadville protests and the Leadville massacre following the strikes in 1914. That was actually created through a grant that was this idea of a game. So I told you that I had started with this idea of playing games to better engage, to really not just engage students with each other, but to engage deeper into the text, right? I think for most of us, getting students to read can be very challenging. We started doing research into this idea of gamification that had really started in the business world, particularly in customer service, and in 2009-2010 was bridging the gap into academia. And the idea is that you take regular mundane tasks that you have to do anyway, and you make it into a game. And for a lot of for about a year, I had been doing this narrative project it was a traditional research paper where students picked a topic, they picked a region, right, and they wrote a 5 to 7 page research paper. It was a way to introduce research. It was scaffolded into a proposal, into a annotated bibliography, into a document analysis, into an outline, into close reading, a draft, and then the final. But students really were disengaged. They do it. They liked the fact that I gave them the opportunity to pick a topic, but towards the middle of the semester, they were bored with it. And so I wondered, well, they really, really liked playing the games because they got to play somebody else. And so I came up with this idea, and then I kind of, with Sarah and Cindy, we've refined it, and this is, I think, my second Sarah, this is our second or third semester. Sarah and I actually use many of the same assignment sheets. There are a couple that we differ on, but the description of the overall project, they're going to still write a 5 to 7 page paper. There's going to be research provided, right? They're still going to have research. But what's going to be different is they're going to place themselves into the event they're researching. So they're going to write a historical narrative. And I really thought about the fact that most people think history is really boring, and yet historical movies and historical fiction are often on bestseller lists, right? So we really love historical fiction, and we history. And so I thought, well, how can I make this gap, right? So I actually asked them to create a person who could historically have lived in the time period. It has to be based off of research. So if they want to be a peasant in France, they have to know something about what being a peasant in Loire, France was like in the 14th century. They have to be historically plausible, but they can have fun with it. And the first thing I have them do is I have them create an actual image of themselves. Often they go to Google Images and they download a picture. But again, it helps them to focus on this time period and put themselves into an event. It turns out my students do far more research than they were doing before, and they really enjoy the process because they feel like they're creating a fictive world, although what they're really doing is recreating a historical world and putting themselves into it. Characteristics of a historical narrative, and I tell them that this is actually a growing subgenre of history, and it is, but it has to have accurate historical events and details of actual places. So they can't just make it up. You see a ferry in Scotland because that's not historically plausible. Now, in my mythology class, because I also teach in the humanities, that might actually be something we can do. In one person's point of view, many times they'll write a diary or a memoir. They'll do I'm telling my grandchildren about this event. So it's always in the first person. But they do get to create some characters and some circumstances, like they can create a family. They might create some of their backgrounds. So they are still able to engage in some fiction. I tell them out of a 5 to 7 page paper, no more than a page can be pure fiction. Again, they create a historical event from a region and time period. They have to recreate that world. I ask them to make it as real as possible using research from primary and secondary sources. And then they have to know something about the event. So not only are they putting themselves into this world, they actually there's got to be a major event that happens in that world that they interact with. Maybe it's the Black Death. Maybe it is an ice age, right? Something that they are confronted with, that in some kind of event that they actually have to confront, and this is going to make up the bulk of their narrative.
This is where Nina and I differ, where stylistically I let my students choose what they prefer to do. Some students have been taught so often to not use first person that using first person will give them a heart attack. So stylistically, I let them choose. And I also I don't ask them to insert themselves into a historical event, but rather to create a historical character that fits. A majority of their work in the scaffolded assignment will be from the discipline of history. So they outline their event, they do document analysis, secondary source analysis. So a lot of it kind of sounds a little more New Agey than I think it actually is. They attempt to do an assignment where they can express their creativity while still being within the academic realm of history. I actually did a trial run of this, not a whole assignment. I had it as one assignment, and that's that once I took the pressure off of my students having to formally write academically, their writing improved. So I'm intrigued with this idea that maybe we can get their passion for writing to come from having fun with it. So I kind of had an idea, and Nina had the similar idea, and then we kind of talked, and it was like, hey, we should work on this together. It's one of those interesting moments where you kind of have the same ideas together. So I kind of designed the art and Valorant, and back to me, and she's all like, well, I like this, but we change this. We need to add more structure here, and we need to do that. So that's where a lot of the collaboration comes from, is we'll have an idea. And then I ran the against with Gordon Ralphing, another one of our colleagues, and he pointed out where we could bulk up the academic and really highlight the student's own research. So we talk about collaboration, and we of our historians know how different we are. We all kind of have a similar, which is we want to have our students have a passion for history, because probably got sick of everybody telling us history is boring, so stop making me learn it. And I decided to really change some things. Do you like Nina?
Interestingly enough, this is Cindy again, I'm sorry. Interestingly enough, while I don't do the full semester character arc, I also use a narrative that we've been able to storm with each other. Mine comes at, depending on the semester, at a particular point in time. In this case, this is an example of the first couple of steps of historical narrative assignment for US History 1. And so this is about week 5 of a 10-week class. And they can choose a character, and as you can see, or any gender or race that they would think would be appropriate. And it's someone that's to do with one of the significant events of that period that we're talking about in that unit. So I give them a specific, should have kind of triggered search, let them imagine what to be within that event. Does require them, of course, to do some of that research while it's not a full-blown research project. And it still allows them that fun element that Sarah mentioned.
Before we go on to that, I also want to bring into the fact that we kind of collaborate. Are pretty different scholars and kind of focus on different things. I know Cindy loves colonial America, and Nina, if you ever want to know anything about Egypt, she's down to see. But I discovered is by giving the students a buy-in, so to speak, giving them that choice in their assignments, they're really excited. I'm currently teaching a world history class, and I have some pretty fabulous subject matters that haven't been covered, and probably I would never get to cover in a world history class, and the students are bringing this knowledge into the classroom. So it's a fun way to adapt, but like Cindy, it's not, you don't have to like go full on out with it. She took the part that she liked, and that's kind of what we're getting at.
It kind of, a lot of our ideas kind of coalesced. And it's really, like they said, this is actually where Cindy and I met. When we went to the national conference in New York City that year, we were actually roommates. And so a lot of, again, conversations, when you're sharing your room for 4 days with someone, you're going to have conversations that you would never have in another setting. Right, been to a couple of conferences with us, and again, you start having conversations you would never have. So for me, conferences are a great opportunity because you're outside of your everyday life anyway, whether they're conferences on campus or off campus. I find that if they're on campus, right, we have lots of breaks, coffee breaks, typically breaks between sessions. You have lunches and or dinners. So these are really fun ways. If you're leaving or going off campus, some of our best collaborations have happened in the car on our way to and from the conference. So this is just one example of a conference that all of us have been to, and that really kind of solidified an approach to our teaching. Although, as Cindy and Sarah both said, we did very differently based on our scholarship and our ideas about education. But game-based, sort of interdisciplinary curriculum that allows competition and gives rewards, and it forces, it encourages here, but I really think it forces students to engage themselves in the text. I had one game just recently where it was very, very apparent to the students who had not been prepared. There were 2 students that it was very clear had not done the reading, and the next time they came, it was very apparent that they did the reading. I didn't have to say anything. The other students didn't have to say anything, but just pressure that when everyone else are having these tremendous debates about the text and you haven't done the reading, it is very, very apparent. What I like about this particular environment is it is a flipped environment. They do, like I said, the majority of the work out of the classroom. I do mini lectures that I post. If there's a particular part of the period that they're grappling with, I do it on the fly. So it's faster because students will grapple with different parts of the historical narrative. That is the end of our formal presentation because we wanted to give time for us to, as a group, to brainstorm and to have a discussion on whether or not you would use this kind of collaboration and how you would use it and how you would adapt it to your discipline and to your particular personality. Open it up to the floor.
Well, I'm Ron Smith, and I would like to say that I have done this type of informal colleague interaction and have found it quite stimulating. I'm in psychology, and we not only oftentimes work in the classroom, but working with people in counseling. And so this kind of process is familiar to us, but I really do agree there's a lot to value here.
Ron, what kind of things have you done in the past? You said you've done some of this, but
well, as I'd indicated, not only have I done it in academic things, like say at conferences or at schools, but because I'm in psychology, a lot of us also practice professionally, and so we might do it in professional offices, you know, where we're in between sessions, or we might do it at professional meetings that don't have to do with academics so much, but have to do with professional practice. And I just think that so often things are very stimulating. You can get very isolated a lot of times. I think, as we know, you were talking about grading individually, but I think often we may spend a lot of alone time, and it's fine to be alone with yourself, but after a while it's just too much. And I think that we need that kind of interaction. So when I saw that this was the topic for tonight, I thought this is something I want to be involved in. This is kind of a way of doing it right here.
That's very true. I always joke because we have the department get whatever, and everybody brings their significant other, and you just see the significant others like glom together because they can't take anybody talking about history anymore. We always joke that we get our history talking out so that the people at home don't want to, us to leave again. So I think that also helps, and it also helps for when you're talking with people in discipline, because you get the new theories and the new ideas and the new arguments that maybe you're not aware of.
Sarah, one of the things that I like so well is that we all have because we have this informal thing, whenever one of my colleagues finds something they think I'd be interested in, or vice versa, right, we'll send an article to the latest scholarship that maybe I haven't had time to look at, or maybe I've seen something and said, you know what, Glenn Rolfing, or, which would really, really benefit from this. And so it's nice when you have that kind of relationship established that you can actually start resources that go beyond just the classroom, but into a larger scholarship. Because, as I'm sure you're all aware, we teach a lot, there's a lot going on, and sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest scholarship in our fields. This is a way to get the benefit of looking at things that we are very interested in, but maybe don't have as much time to devote to as we'd like. Liz has a question. She said she went to the Playtesters Conference at Pikes Peak and was inspired, but she's having a difficult way thinking about adapting the concept of games to first-year writing course because they seem to be very grounded in specific historical events. And so she was wondering if anyone had suggestions on how the format could be generalized to a class that teaches writing strategies rather than a discipline-specific context. I
actually, compared to Nina and Cynthia, I actually don't do very often. I don't do the formal games just because the nature of a lot of the courses I teach, they're survey level, so I have a hard time fitting in these huge taking games. So what I do is I take the idea of action. Really, all you have to do is think of like an idea that you get students talking about and writing about, and make sure there's some clear lines they can research. For example, in my ancient history, I have them set up civilizations themselves, and they kind of guide where it goes. But like freshman comp level writing or, other writing things, I know you guys write a lot of top-specific arguments or maybe the certain writing style. You can look at some of the topics and arguments you have them make. Maybe you can see if you can break them up into group factions. It can be like a one-class meeting assignment instead of having to do this whole game. That's sense.
Okay, go ahead.
One other suggestion is that a lot of the games are meant to be used in different aspects, meaning that, for example, you might use the Athens game in philosophy. And if you use the Athens game in philosophy, you would focus on the argument surrounding Socrates as opposed to the victory in the victory over the Spartans. And so apart some of the games and using just the elements that might be particular to something that you think would appeal to the students is also always a action.
He had his hand up, David.
Yeah, thought, and sort of a little off topic from what you're discussing, but time with professional development and sharing ideas. In terms of maximizing time and effectiveness, I was during the PW week, if we're together with professors that teach the same course and set aside some time to talk the best way to deliver certain lessons in that course, some ideas of enriched delivery. We're going to be over there anyway for other seminars. It would be for me to have a full-time job to be able to meet with instructors during that same period. So it's before the semester starts, so it's from my mind where I can go back and look at lessons and kind of spruce them up and make them a little bit more interesting. I would like to hear some comments on that. Over.
I know some of the departments already do this. I know all the divisions have at least one meeting during PDW. That certain of the departments, like I teach for both humanities and history, both of my departments have department meetings after the division meetings during PDW. I see Christy Callahan is on. Christy, can you chime in on maybe a more formal way of encouraging maybe the discipline-specific PDW session?
I was kind of contemplating it as soon as Dave started speaking. One of the ideas that we had in PDW week, Thursday seems to be the day that is kind of that day that is just a collaborative day. And we haven't really formalized it up until this point, but we've kind of played around with the idea of doing exactly what you're saying, Dave, to carve out time so that there's a day and a time that we kind of look forward to every fall and spring. That is the day that disciplines have that time to meet. Classes aren't in session yet. We're putting our syllabi together and kind of coming up with ideas. It'll give that fine-tuning moment or sharing, hey, this is what I've just come up with and I tweaked it and I'm going to write, kind of giving each other the boost of I'm looking forward to trying something new, or I took the idea from you and I'm trying it this semester. So what do you guys think of carving out a day like that or a morning of the PW week on Thursday? Would that be enough to entice folks to come in?
Well, I would recommend that department would have a jury. So if you did a mass email being like, hey, I'm going to be at PDW this week and let's have lunch Thursday and talk. Like, may not wait for the formal, but network through our directory, because everybody, no matter how many classes you teach, is part of that directory. So you can go to your department site, you can find a directory, and just do a math. I'll be at PDW week on Thursday, and I was wondering if you'd like to meet or eat or something like that.
How many of your departments have a D2L shell like the division shells? Because I know that with my departments, we have that division shell for the department, and times we can use the discussion boards. Interesting, because in my department, one department tends to use the discussion board a lot. The other department tends to use Facebook. And so it's just kind of a strange. It is the PPCC online shell, Suzanne. Thank you. But it's very interesting that we get better discussion on Facebook, and I'm not really sure why.
My response to that, I give one example. The Business 115 class, it has sections. I mean, students have to take it. How, like, if we put on the schedule, if you're interested in collaborating with other fellow Business 115 faculty, there's an opportunity for you to meet from 10 to 11:30 on Thursday. Just ideas. That's, for me, that'd be easier for me to just walk in and with so many different sections, you would hope that maybe 5 or 6 or 7 faculty would be available at that time. Over.
Yes, I was even just reading the chat board, and Julian maybe an off-site location as well. And certainly CETL has looked into taking events into an off-site location. Quite frankly, we have such large numbers, there's not a whole lot of capacity that can manage us. So we're certainly open to those ideas and maybe doing, informal chats. We certainly hope with the new CETL space that might also be a collaboratorium that we can invite people to come to as well, randomly as you want to meet, as, whether a large adjunct pool wants to meet together or a department or even a whole discipline that wants to get together. So I love all these ideas. Thank you for continuing to share them and coming up with even more. And we want to explore as many opportunities to get these kind of discussions to continue. This is how we steal from one another. The best educators are the best thieves, is what Stephen Brookfield says. So I love this. Thank you.
I want to be very considerate of your time, so we do try to make sure that we tell 7 to 8, so we start on time, we end on time. We will stick around for as long as people have ideas or want to talk, but this does conclude the formal section of our presentation. And on behalf of Sarah and Cindy, we would like to thank you for attending this evening. Suzanne, Word actually has great templates. We just use the newsletter template. And, that's how we got our syllabi. Yeah.
Oh, well.
And we all picked the template we liked best. I mean, that's really how we did it.
That's easy. Well, my syllabi end up being lengthy. I'm assuming there's probably templates or something. Well, I do what I do for a living, right? So it wouldn't be hard for me to create a design, but I'm like, dang, why didn't I think of doing that? Because I always ask my students, how many of you did you read the syllabi? Only a couple ever do. And I'm like, you need to read it because it's going to tell you what you're going to need to do this semester and what tools you're going to need to have and what I expect from you. And so laid out more attractively, I think that's a home run.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I had a pretty long syllabi, like 12 pages, and I was able to, I mess around with the templates. I don't use them straight up. I'm able to get that 12-page syllabi into 4 pages.
And when we do, well, we all do, we divide it. So, I cut, none of them are more than 4 pages, and no section is more than 4 pages. And we use the template. We use the exact language. We just put it in the attractive format. I see Jean's note about the department giving the template. We have the template as well. And so we just put it in the newsletter format and split up as appropriate.
Exactly, and it was so popular that Sarah actually at the last history symposium gave a presentation to the rest of the history faculty, and our chair, it's very funny, our chair actually it now tasks her every time he wants to do something attractive. Like he does an annual letter out to the students in the history department, and he was like, it's not pretty, it doesn't have pictures, and so he tasks Sarah every time to kind of help him do things, because and so I mean and we whenever we do something that perhaps is outside of what might be considered traditional, we always kind of go to our chair first and say, well, what do you think about this? And it is very funny because at this point he's like try it, see how it works. And so we've been able to get some have a lot of support, and I think that's really crucial.
To Christy on Tuesday about maybe one of these PDWs of offering a workshop to show do some of these things, but not this fall because I've already said to too many things in life, but I'll definitely put it on my calendar to offer at one of these PDW events.
I found it very helpful. Sarah was able to speak for both Nina and I because both of us were unable to attend our last symposium and present the specific ideas to our department as visitors before spring semester. And that goes back to that informal collaboration as well, because she knew what elements we used, et cetera, because we'd worked on them together.
I loved your ideas for implementing some type of creative game and having them write a historical type paper. I'm not sure I can apply that to the courses I teach, but I do think it's brilliant. So nicely done.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think what we've learned as we've collaborated is we might not, for example, with the syllabus, I was at the EW keynote this spring, and would suggested, well, why don't you do some kind of flipped model over the syllabus? Maybe that people have got, maybe that people will read it. And I thought it was brilliant. Now I tell them the first day, here's the syllabus, read it tonight, come back, because you have to recreate a one-page syllabus from what I give you. And my students know that syllabus probably better than I do now. And it was one of those, I was like, oh, how am I ever going to get my students to do this? And is there's always a way to take an idea and adapt it to your discipline. If you can't do a game, right? I liked, I think Liz's idea actually of sitting around perhaps with and thinking dinner party with people you admire and what would that look like. I think it's great and something I hadn't thought about. So I'm going to have to think about that.
I colleagues in other disciplines, and one assignment I really liked was one of my art history colleagues. Was she had her students create an interactive art gallery, a PowerPoint or Prezi, where they pick their favorite piece of art. They're able to curate it, give it all the stats and stuff. They were able to use a visual exhibition to show the concepts of the class. So it's not, I don't teach art history, but I've kind of adapted it where I have them explain the historical relevance of a piece of art or something like that. So it also engages the visual learners out there as well as get my history parts across.
That's actually brilliant. I don't do history either, but that'd be something you could definitely share with the MGD dean or chair. I'm with Jenna Shern. That's great because a lot of us are visual learners, so that's a great idea.
The idea of having them find an author they don't agree with, with them, or what they do agree with and have to argue with them. It's important for students to be able to disagree civilly and know what that looks like. To be able to play, devil kit. And they come to my class and they're very uncomfortable with writing argumentative papers. And I'd be curious if my English comp colleagues have that same issue. My students want to write an informative piece, but they have a very difficult time arguing a position.
All the time as well, Nina. I think that, I tell my students all the time that historians like to argue, and we don't argue in a manner, but history is all about interpretation of events. And so that really where it comes up. And so this is them being the expert and having to figure out how to be it. So that argumentative element is wonderful.
I think if I get a short piece, that's really a great idea because for students, particularly beginning students, they don't have the comfort level of arguing because they see somebody maybe is a PhD or has a degree and they think, oh, well, they're automatically right. So I think it's a good experience for them to realize that, hey, just because somebody is the authority in something doesn't mean they're 100% right.
Go ahead and sign off as I walked in the door and got on dinner. So I haven't eaten dinner or anything yet. I really appreciated the feedback and the ideas.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Wonderful ideas. I'm really glad to see how you are pointing out how to argue to students because that's probably one of the biggest things we have to students when we get them in history is, how to formulate an argument.
From the last webinar, I know that you had made the recommendation to have a discussion board on the PPCC online campus channel for us to think about new webinar topics and PD topics. I did create that. So I'm hoping that people, because really we've done we'll do, 4 webinars this spring, and I'm really looking forward to continuing that next fall.
We'll leave you guys as well, but like Cindy, I hauled bunnies from Centennial to get home in time, so I think I'm going to call it a night.
Thanks, Sarah. Good night.
Good night, buddy.
Russell, I just wanted to say I'm signing off. I really appreciated listening to these ideas. I love the idea of splitting up the syllabi. I never thought of that before. And some of the gamification ideas were really food for thought. Anyway, I'm signing off. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Russell, for joining us, and good night.
Hey, good.
All right, June, go enjoy your husband. Make him good hot cocoa, and we will talk soon. Is there anything you would like to chat about?
Webinar team, Nina, so she's kind of observing. So I think she's,
She was on Seattle, but I just thought she was hanging out. I didn't realize she was on the team.
No, she's observing and stuff. So yes, I think good. That was great.
Yeah, it was fun, Sarah. I wanted to apologize for the last webinar. I didn't put it on my calendar, and so when my sister said, "Hey, let's go to the movies," I said, "Okay, I have nothing going on," and I felt so bad.
Oh, no problem. That happens, and Sharon in and kind of did, and it was fine.
Yeah, I told Christy, I'm like, I'm gonna have to put